the clients that we've had the best success with are the ones who are, as you said, they're willing to invest the time and have the patience to work with you to try and get these technologies over the line. And they 100% understand that, yeah, as you were saying, that we are startups, we are understaffed, but on top of that, we are going to make mistakes and stuff's going to break. And if stuff breaks, it's like, we're not just going to leave you. We will fix it. It's just, we need to take the time to fix it. And it may not mean that we can operate within standard operating times. That's why we all work more hours than what we would if we were actually employed.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Future of Construction. Today I'm speaking with Tom Macrokanis, founder and director of Macro3D. Tom, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Chloe.
Of course. Well, we always start off with how did you get into construction? So what is your journey into this industry?
Sure. So I came probably not your traditional route into the construction industry. I originally was actually a software developer. So when I left school, I was writing code for all sorts of different programs, my own and for people, other people as well, clients and whatnot. And from there, I ended up stumbling across 3D printing. So I was working on a particular job and found some stuff about 3D printing and was like, that's a pretty cool technology. What can it be applied to? And so I went through all the different things, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, all that sort of stuff, and landed on construction and kind of thought that was probably pretty accessible. There's no one really doing it in Australia. So I kind of had a first mover advantage in that, from that point of view. And was just like, let's give this a go. So I started working in construction from the 3D printing point of view from the start. And from there, then I kind of started to backfill that with other experience working on site. Because as I was doing the 3D printing work, it was like, let's make sure we're coupling that with some traditional stuff so I understand kind of the construction process and then how 3D printing will fit into that construction process. And from there, I went and got qualified as a boilermaker, which is a welder, and kind of started my steel fabrication company as well. So that's what I run in conjunction with a 3D printing company. And then we just started to tack other things on as we went. So a bit of a different route into the construction industry, but we're here and we're trying to make a difference now.
I love it. And in fact, actually, I don't think I've met another person who's had a similar kind of introduction to the construction industry as me, where it's like, okay, we saw something in tech or, in data, and we came and applied it into this industry. However, you went that much deeper and you actually went and swung some hammers and built your own company. That's fantastic. How long did that take in terms of like years to build? Like what kind of timeline are we talking about?
So the steel company it's actually pretty new. We're about 2.5 years old as a steel business. And I reckon it was about 6 or 7 years ago, I started work around 3D printing, concrete 3D printing, that sort of stuff. So like it really was a fair few years before I could actually go and start the steel company, because obviously I still got to get qualified and all that sort of thing during that time. So yeah, it was kind of start the concrete 3D printing stuff. Turns out you need a way to pay for like building all that 3D printing technology. So we needed to keep working during that time because investment in Australia is not exactly the easiest thing to rustle up. It's we don't have a very hardware friendly investment environment. If you're a software company, it's not too bad, but as soon as you start mentioning that you got to go and buy pieces of equipment, like real stuff, the industry the VCs just turn a blind eye and they don't want to know about you. So that's been really interesting from our point of view. But now we're sitting there going, well, we've got no way of really funding this other than funding it ourselves. And so that's where we started the steel company, because I was doing little jobs here and there for people. So we were like, let's try and turn that into a company that can sustain a second company. So we built a company to fund our new company, which is our 3D printing company. So not the ideal way to do it. I really don't recommend it, but we're so far making it work.
What have been like the biggest challenges in building it that way versus say maybe have you gone a VC funded approach before?
We've tried. We've definitely tried. The VC funded approach was I guess, my preferred way to do it. Obviously, being a younger person, I don't have a massive asset backing. In fact, really not much at all. So to try and get any sort of debt or anything like that, I needed another asset to kind of allow me to get there. And so using something like a VC fund was, or just some sort of investor, was going to be my preferred way of doing it. It was going to be the fastest way to kind of get that money behind us and push through the process as quick as we could. But unfortunately, it's not really worked like that. The challenges that we've, I guess, come across has been, obviously, I've got a second business with people that I have to run every single day. I've got to find work for that company so that it will continue to grow and sustain itself. But there's all the other, I guess, difficulties of building that company. And then you've got this other company on the other side, which is a brand new technology that you've still got to sink your time into. So it's just you're running two time sucks at the same time. It becomes difficult, but we've started to kind of get a decent process in place, and it's allowing both companies to still. I wouldn't say they're not both thriving, but they're doing okay.
That's wild. Like I mean, coming from the VC side or like VC backed company and in construction tech, like I couldn't imagine running another business on top of trying to constantly narrow scope on the business that we have today. So kudos to you. That's huge, man. In terms of Macro3D, where do you operate today?
So we're operating out of factory in Pakenham. So that's Pakenham's in Victoria, in Australia.
Do you do any Europe or America?
At the moment, we're only in Australia. We've had some inquiries from some companies over in like Africa, Europe, Asia, the US. So we've had kind of people reaching out to us wanting to buy machines and that sort of thing, and we've gone and kind of set back quotes and that. But we're still waiting to hear back from them and find out exactly what they're wanting to do. There's a lot of universities who kind of reach out. Obviously, they're all pretty much, there's a fair number of universities these days who have these machines because it's necessary for their research. So, yeah, we've tried to get into that market, but ultimately, it's not really our goal is to be a research machine. Like, we're not really that interested in that. Ultimately, we're trying to solve a problem, which is we've got a shortage of housing and a shortage of labor. And so if you cannot solve those two things, there's no point in researching it. So we're trying to focus on the real problem for us, which is trying to get more houses out with less people.
With less capital involved as well, because what you guys do cuts capital in half. I'm sure of it. Speak to the optimization. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so like the optimization at the moment, like there is a lot of false advertising out there. And I know that a guy, Jared Gross, he's got a construction podcast as well. He's very big on calling everyone out about this. The numbers are there and they will work eventually, but at the moment, the numbers are not stacking up for everyone. Now, there's a few things that we need to fix for that to happen. And one of those is obviously we need to see more of these buildings built. Like at this stage, you're looking at like your 1970s computer industry, like that's where we're at 3D printer wise in terms of construction. Like we're still sort of trying to work out how to build, you know, we're not at a stage at the moment, which is like thriving as an industry. We're doing well. We're putting things together. Buildings are going up. They're starting to look really good. There's a lot of good innovations. The material science side of things is really progressing. The engineering and the regulation side is starting to catch up. Again, it's still not there. And that's kind of what's still driving costs up. So like in Australia, if we're trying to get a building certified, we actually have to go and get a certificate of occupancy. But to get that, you need to have followed the building code correctly. Now, if you've got a new solution that you're trying to put into the building code, or you're trying to build in a new way, you need to have what's called a performance solution. I imagine there's probably something similar in the Canadian building code. And so for us, we've got to produce that, which involves more engineering costs, which offsets the cost of construction. So you kind of you end up netting out at roughly the same cost. You got a little bit of a benefit, but not the big benefit that should be there from this sort of technology. So although you get the speed, you're not necessarily getting the cost yet, but you are getting the speed side of things.
Interesting. And is that the biggest resistance you're facing when introducing this, or is there other bigger resistances?
Yeah, there's plenty of other resistances. One of the most common questions we get is, how do we do electrical and how do we do plumbing? And it's like, they're honestly the most basic answers, like the most basic of questions. Like, if you just look at what double brick is and just copy that for how you do all of, like, literally everything from putting a power point in to putting downlights in to, yeah, putting a tap or putting a shower in, just copy what double brick does. That's exactly what we're doing. Like, we're not reinventing anything because we've got to fit in the building code. So our methodology the whole way through has been, if this is our building code, what's similar to what we're doing and how do we copy it? So if we've got bricks and we've got to put a power point in, well, how do you put a brick in a double brick house? How do you put a power point in? And we just go and copy that because that's all we're doing.
Interesting. So you're looking at what's approved in the building code right now to figure out,
Yeah.
like, how do you make it the least amount of resistance to introduce this technology? Fascinating.
Exactly.
And is that, like, how have you managed to convince traditional builders in adopting this new technology?
Holding their hand and telling them it's okay is really
Mhm.
it's really the majority of it. It's saying it's not as big and scary as what you think. Like, yes, we're building differently, but ultimately there's ways to walk through the building code. We really had to take, so for the builds that we're putting together, we're having to take teams of people through almost like a big education process where we'll have a builder, we'll have an inspector, and we'll have the engineer, and all three of them have to be walked through the process step by step, and they all have to be comfortable with each other to make sure that when we get to the end, we can still be granted a certificate. So that's been the real key for us, and that's what's taken probably the most amount of time, is because if you go to an engineer's going to be too busy to sit there and explain to you how you're going to walk through the building code with a new technology. So that's been the real trick, is having to sit there and learn and try and work out your own way through it, and then go to the engineer and say, hey, this is how I think we can do it. Can you poke holes in any of these issues? And so, like, for instance, we're having some issues with how we're going to waterproof this material for the external and for the internal. And so we've had to go and get testing for that, and then you have to go and get, again, performance solutions done for them. So it's just walking through these sorts of things with the engineers and with the people who know these things really deeply, and then trying to extract the information out of it, synthesize it yourself, and then come up with a solution, put it back to the engineer and go, will this work? And then they'll often sit there and think about it. They're really good at the analytical side, but
Mhm.
you've got to sit down and be the creative side and kind of come up with the solution. And sometimes you get lucky and you do have good engineers who are able to think a bit more creatively. And I do have those as well. Like, yeah, our team who we work with they're great. But sometimes they've got to be just pushed over a little bit.
And so do you have those engineers as part of your organization, or is that's who you're working with? Interesting. So does it
Yeah.
require additional costs then to have that kind of back and forth?
A little bit, yeah. So thankfully, these guys have been great in kind of helping us get to this point. They've invested a lot of time and energy themselves because they see the opportunity and they see what 3D printing can become. And if they are at the forefront, then that obviously gives them a competitive advantage over all of their competitors in the industry. So it's just a matter of making sure. Well, for them, it was making sure they were backing a horse that was going to still keep running in the race. That was the biggest thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I mean, oh gosh, this is honestly the biggest sticking point, right? Is like, who wants to go first? And who wants to help define the, how it's done, the protocol, the workflow, and then, for the Gen Pop to come in and start using it as the, the forward thinking kind of approach to how you implement this technology. And so I'm curious, like, when you're dealing with these kind of early stages where you're still kind of, yes, the economics, they work once it's mass adopted, once it's, better built into legislation, so on. I guess, how does 3D printing change the economics of construction compared to conventional methods in the current state and then in the future state?
So we pick up some efficiencies in terms of speed. It's probably one of the biggest things. So like it's one of those things. At the moment, we can print at a certain price, and let's say that price is $250 a square meter. Now, let's say you're running a business, you're not going to drop your profit margin more than what you have to. So if your current industry standard is at $300 a square meter and you're printing at 250, but you're making a decent margin on that, you're not going to keep dropping that margin down for the sake of cutting the industry right down.
Mhm.
That's kind of what's happening at the moment. And that's happening for a lot of people is that they're dropping it enough to be cheaper, but not dropping it as much as what they probably could. So
Interesting. So let me recap that. You're saying that part of part of 3D printing your concrete allows you to reduce the cost it takes for you to print your concrete or to pour your concrete, I guess. And then you have the ability to modulate your margin to then win the opportunity because you can come in at a lower cost. But right now, are we saying that our contractors who are using Macro 3D are kind of keeping their costs kind of stable to industry standard and almost recouping some of that margin right now?
yes and no. And part of that too is we've still got a lot of cost involved with setting this up. So
Mhm.
there is a lot of extra cost that sits on top of the business. So although we might have a big margin in terms of like cost of goods, and that sort of side of things, you don't necessarily get that. Like you're not seeing or you're not realizing all of that profit at the end of it. You're actually still got a lot of investment that you made initially to try and get to that point. So we're sitting there trying to pay that back. It's
Mhm.
meaning that we're able to keep our costs lower, but it's like by how much? And then there's all these other things that go into different sites, and it's honestly we are cheaper, but it's not by as much as what the industry is saying that we are cheaper. I think the bigger point is that we can provide a speed advantage. And so and obviously time is money. So you are still providing some sort of benefit. But ultimately, if you're building faster, that means more buildings can be put out there, which is then ultimately going to provide more opportunities for people to get into these buildings, which at the end of the day is why we started Macro 3D in the first place. It was looking around going, how are my friends going to afford to buy houses when everything's so expensive and we're making $45,000 a year? It's like, how do you have $45,000 a year in a 700 grand home? Like that math doesn't math.
No, and I think that's a really interesting point when you come down to, like, sometimes these technologies at the start, like, yes, longer term, they're going to have this massive cost reduction or cost improvement. But at the start, it's about speed and efficiency. And that's something that I think is important to start looking at, innovative construction companies that are looking to really push the mold and be first movers are the ones that are looking at how am I optimizing on speed and efficiencies instead of simply just on cost and bottom line, because I know that they will pay out. And it's a longer term investment that I'm making that may not pay out in the first year or 2 years, but 5 to 10, massive. And if we're looking at, we talk to companies all the time who are growing, right? They're using Mercator to grow. And one of the biggest value props for them is we're trying to grow from, $100 million general contracting company to a $500 million general contracting in 10 years. So there is that time frame. We're not operating. We're not like tech startups. We're not like in 2 years it has to, go to the moon. We do operate on longer time frames when we're companies that are working in field.
100%. I think that's what's really hard too for investors is because our companies are quite similar in that we're kind of we're kind of between two industries. We're not tech, but we're not construction. And that's what's really tricky. And so we're playing on construction timelines with tech needs. And that's the trickiest bit. So although we're trying to put all of these pieces together, and for you guys, you've got development, we've got development and hardware and all these things to put in place. Without that capital up front, you can't go and execute. And then you're being paid on construction payment terms as well, which also doesn't really check out as well. We're talking about 30-day end of month payment terms for a job that you go and complete. Like, we need that money yesterday because we're investing in what we're doing to try and make it work. And if you're a traditional tech startup, that's fine because at the end of every month, you're getting your $30 a month or whatever, operating on those sorts of revenue models. Whereas for us, we're like progress payment, final payment, and then we get strung out because that's just what the construction industry does. So, yeah, it is a very tricky industry to navigate. It's definitely not something that they teach in business school. That'd be for sure.
I bet it's something you learn firsthand in hand to
Yeah.
hand combat. I mean, out of curiosity, and this is one of the things that when I started this podcast, I was really passionate about and still am, is the kind of organizational shift. Like, who are your best customers in terms of how they operate, how they think, what they prioritize, and what can other companies kind of learn from those?
You've actually got me on this one. That's a super good question.
You know, I'm happy to have a discussion about it because it is certainly something that we look at all the time.
Yeah.
You're dealing with these kind of early adopters. What do they look like? What's the kind of crossing the chasm jump that you have to make to the general population for them to understand it? I find that the folks that are our best customers are the ones that understand that, one, they're working with a startup, which means that they're able to be involved very early, help influence, the direction that we're headed, and help kind of shape the innovation. And they might themselves have already a thesis or a hypothesis of where the industry needs to go and why technology like this is really important. But there's this immense amount of creativity and kind of forward that they have. There's also this immense amount of patience and knowledge that, like, we are constantly understaffed and overburdened in terms of how much we need to build. And that, there is kind of a back and forth between being patient and yes, it'll come, and also being creative and sending us your ideas. And then I would say experimentative. The ones that I think are the boldest out there are the ones that are going, I know theoretically that this will work, and I'm willing to try it from multiple different angles more than once to try and make it fit within what we're trying to do, because we're trying to learn from them, they're trying to learn from us, and we're both just trying to do this like dance and jive back and forth until we figure out like what is the consistent like dance steps that we want to take together that's repeatable and consistent, and then apply it to the general population that we can teach them and educate them on. So we're kind of at
100%.
now where we're just like, we're now starting to introduce ourselves to Gen Pop, and I speak Gen Pop because I come from the marketing and advertising space, but like, you know what I mean? Like your general, that kind of like middle stage, max volume adoption group.
The majority,
Yeah, there you go, the majority. And we're trying to kind of figure out, okay, there is this kind of knowledge gap, this introduction that we have to make about what Mercator is and how they've been taught how to do business development in the past. Kind of, we've been tossing around this concept just today about, basketball and how the game changed. Instead of taking, shots up close to the net, taking shots from the 3-point line, and how our product is really about that shift and how the entire game shifted when we started hiring for people who can take those shots from the 3-point line. So very interesting as to like what's the education that needed to happen in order for the entire game of basketball to change. Similarly, how do we apply it to ourselves? I'm not a sports person, by the way, so I probably screwed up that metaphor. But anyway, that's
you're pretty good on it.
Just an example of like how we've had to look at organizations and how we've had to be able to like suss out who's going to be a good partner for us and so on.
It's definitely about synergy, and I think it's synergy and patience. It's like the clients that we've had the best success with are the ones who are, as you said, they're willing to invest the time and have the patience to work with you to try and get these technologies over the line. And they 100% understand that, yeah, as you were saying, that we are startups, we are understaffed, but on top of that, we are going to make mistakes and stuff's going to break. And if stuff breaks, it's like, we're not just going to leave you. We will fix it. It's just we need to take the time to fix it. And it may not mean that we can operate within standard, like standard operating times. That's why we all work more hours than what we would if we were actually employed. That's definitely an awesome question.
No, I appreciate it. One last one for you that I thought was really interesting. You work in a world where risk is really at the forefront of the decision-making process of what materials do we build with, how do we build, so on. What have you learned about managing risk when you're introducing these types of radically new methods to a super established industry?
Again, another good question. Like, really, construction is 100% just about managing risks, both on-site and off-site. We've had a big issue in Australia where a lot of builders have been going broke. Like, a staggering amount of builders have been going broke, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's regulatory reasons, there's, tax and payment terms, and suppliers going broke, and costs going up, and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of external there's a lot of pressures on a builder when they go and execute, and what a lot of them were doing too is they go and they get signed up to these fixed price contracts, and then 12 months later, when it's time to actually realize the gains of that contract, like, they may have had a 20, 30, 40% margin on there, but that's been eroded away the whole way through, and now they owe 10% on the job, and so they're now having to borrow from the next job to try and pay that extra 10%. So that's been making it really difficult. Is that these builders are all going broke, and so you're losing a lot of these builders in the process. Now, that's meaning that there's obviously less builders available, but what that's also showing is how risky, I guess, the industry is. And now, from a financing point of view, that's also made things difficult. So now the financiers increasing the difficulty to have access to the money, which is again putting more pressure on these businesses, which is again causing more to go broke. And so we're just in this flywheel at the moment in terms of, like, financial risk on all of these companies. That's making it difficult for us to come in and show new technologies, because they're sitting there and going, well, that's fine, but we've got 20 other projects that we're doing at the moment that's already, we're pushing to try and finish those. How are we going to implement your new technology in that without increasing our risk profile on the company? So the way that we've been trying to approach that is again by educating. It's explaining to them and sitting down with them as much as possible. Like, this is explaining to them that this is not something that is completely different from anything the industry has seen. It's like, we have something that is a direct comparison to what what we're trying to do. Double brick and concrete 3D printed walls are basically the same thing. They're both masonry structures, and both of those, if you look at the way that they are constructed, we print layer upon layer. They build block by block, layer by layer. It's the same, and it's just taking them through that and trying to explain to them that, like, it's not that different. That's been a real difficulty. And in terms of, like, other risk management things, it's looking at, well, what other technology can we bring into our system to try and, I guess, make them feel safer. So for us, it was about tracking as much of the print data as we can. So we track a whole lot of data around material properties and environmental properties. And so by having those two pieces, we can sit there and verify that our build is actually correct, or that we are actually meeting the standards that we're saying that we're meeting. So if we're saying that our material is X, we are actually delivering X. We're not just saying that it is, which is currently something that doesn't exist in the industry. Like, if I say to you that my concrete's going to be 32 MPa, unless I have a tester that turns up on site and tests that concrete, no one knows.
Yeah.
Like, and they don't test every single batch. So for us, we've got that data the whole way through the print of the job. It's like, what was it at minute 42 in your print? Well, it's right here. It's written down. This is what it is. It's saved. Eventually, we'd like to transpose that into a blockchain, but we'll get to that once we get some more money behind us. But yeah, that's a whole nother story. So yeah, it's about using technology to try and mitigate the risk in a way that previously couldn't be done.
It's neat to hear what you're talking about, because you're basically saying there's an emotional trust component, which is sitting down, hand-holding, and making sure that they know that you're by their side. There's the data factual component. So you've got the qualitative and the quantitative trust. And then the third one, which I think people overlook all the time, is the fact that you're a startup. You're going to work day and night and make this thing work. And as a result,
100%.
they're going to get the best quality out of kind of being one of the early adopters, which is, I think, oftentimes overlooked in our industry, which is super neat when we get to meet other, construction tech founders. So I really appreciate
100%.
it today, Tom. How can people find out about Macro3D? Where can they find you? How can they keep in touch?
Yeah, for sure. So Tom Macrokanis on all socials. That's where you'll find me. And then you'll find Macro3D at Macro3D on all socials as well. So yeah, if you'll find us there, and it's macro3d.com.au on the website. You can start there, look through all the projects we've been working on and some of the tech that we've been releasing slowly to let people know what we're doing. Really just trying to make a difference, and we'll see how we go. But yeah, it's not easy, but that's not why we do it.
That's not why we do it. Absolutely. Well, hey, man, it's been an awesome chat. Thank you so much for coming on. I've learned a lot, so thank you. And I hope our listeners have. I will link all of that below, so it's really easy and quick for them to click on. But let's keep in touch. And thanks again for joining.
Thanks, Chloe. Appreciate it.